just the sound of a deep, deep breath. Welcome back, guys. Fuck, I've been thinking about you constantly. You're on my mind constantly. I am just fucking loving doing this, and I'm loving hearing from you all, and I love that I get to be a little part of your days. Like, I had a friend voicemail me yesterday and said she was just walking around the house, uh, trying to help her baby get to sleep, and she was listening to me as she did it, and it just made her laugh and feel so connected, and that made me just feel so joyful. So thank you for being here. And I love that, like, these little ideas just keep plopping in my lap throughout the day of the next thing that I want to share through a podcast. And this one, I want to talk about mental health, and specifically, I want to talk about postnatal depression and anxiety. For me, depression and anxiety is something that um, kind of comes at certain points. It's not super regular, but it does happen, and it becomes intensified when I have babies because it fucks with your hormones and your brain chemistry. Why don't they put that in a fucking baby ad? And also, it's just an absolutely huge and momentous physical and emotional and spiritual quest to bring a baby into the world and then tend and care for it. And some babies are harder than others. So for me, when I had my first baby, I fell down the postnatal depression and anxiety rabbit hole, and I fell down hard. So today I wanted to read to you one of the most favorite things that I've ever written. I feel so proud of myself for writing it, and it is all about that story of postnatal depression and anxiety. And it's called The Goddess with Postnatal Depression. I remember the exact moment I knew. I was sitting on the veranda with my love, my 7-month-old daughter in my arms. Tears were streaming down my face, my breath was gasping and rasping as my lungs pushed against a panic attack. It was just our usual morning breakfast. And then a moment of space, a moment of clarity. "Honey," I said, "I don't feel right." It had been a hell of a year, and even longer than that if I pushed my memory back to where the first tendrils began. The week after I found out I was pregnant, when my body began vomiting, I didn't stop for the next 5 weeks. The kilograms of weight that rapidly shed from my body convulsed out onto the garden. The daily struggles to keep down pregnancy multivitamins, or anything else for that matter. The days spent in fetal position on the couch in the sun, staring at my hands. Any other motion, even reading, would render me motion sick enough to run to my special place on the veranda where I projectile fertilized the garden with my mouth. It was the sudden dullness that ebbed at the edges of my mind, saying, "I'm on a train that I cannot get off. No one can even be on this train with me. I am stuck. I am lost. This is too hard." At some point during those purging, hurling weeks, I called my mum and said, "I've had enough. I can't do it anymore. I am never, ever going to get pregnant again." I subsisted by on hope that it would end. And at the same time, I was happy. I know. How can one have antenatal depression and anxiety and be happy at the same time? I have no idea. I know it's a great paradox, and yet it happened to me. I was anxious as my belly bloomed into full moon, and yet I was delighted, ecstatic. I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I glowed. My hands traced circles over the curve of my belly. In response, she would patter her own hands against mine. Worlds meeting worlds. I was the woman who was dancing, and who also had a weight on her shoulders. I worried about birth. I worried about not getting it right. I worried about being made to conform. I worried about having unsupportive midwives. I worried that I wouldn't have read all the books beforehand. There were some moments that stuck out in my mind. At 34 weeks pregnant, dissolving into tears at our appointment with our midwives. At 36 weeks pregnant, Little Mermaid turning breech for the second time, spending hours laying upside down in an effort to help her turn. Calling Chris frantic from a bus, in tears and panicking as I decided I need to get acupuncture that very moment to help her turn. I have no idea how much of this is normal for pregnancy, but however normal it was for pregnancy, it wasn't normal for me. It wasn't normal to be feeling like this. I felt like I was bracing for a great attack. I did what I could to heal it before she was born. My love took me to see a kind-eyed Jungian psychotherapist with large cauldrons of rose quartz crystals beside the lounge. We went to two, not one, two calm birth weekends together because I was convinced I didn't do it properly enough the first time. We meditated together and talked out our feelings and our fears. I was so afraid of being forced to have a birth that was not my own that we even interviewed home birth midwives just a few weeks before Astara was born. The day after that, we drove across the country to my love's grandmother's funeral. I sat in lotus position in the back seat, still encouraging our mermaid to turn. I knew there must be an answer inside me. As we drove back home and red-flecked scrub and sage-tinted leaves fled past our window, I knew the answer. I knew that we wouldn't have a home birth. I knew that my daughter would need special assistance in order to come into the world. And I knew that in order to feel at peace with going wherever we needed to go for her to be born, I needed extra support. I already had my love as birth support and our precious doula as birth coach, but I wanted my birth to be sacred. I wanted to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that we would be surrounded by angels, and I wanted to be reminded that I was a goddess, wherever we went and no matter what happened. When we returned home, synchronicity happened. My spiritual mentor, Elenita, was arriving back in our town just in time for Astara's birth. I asked if she could be present for the birth. She said yes. I felt at peace. A week before Astara was due, we took photos with our doula at our favourite sacred place in Canberra, Hanging Rock. I stretched back against a rock, leaning into a crescent moon. I wonder if that's what began the birth. An hour later, after we dropped our doula at home, we ate fish and chips. I cleared my bit of the last bit of coleslaw, and with a rush, my waters broke. Then, nothing happened. We slept. We woke up. We made a large vegetarian lasagna, imagining we would eat it after birth. Instead, my uterus was quiet. I'd done my research. I knew there was little chance of affection until after 72 hours. I knew 95% of women commence labour naturally before 72 hours. And I also knew that once I'd been admitted into hospital, they would commence with interventions after 24 hours. And I dearly wanted to give my body the time to see what happened, to give in to my body, and then give to my body. That night, the softest of soft contractions, I fell asleep and woke up at 3 a.m. There were no more contractions. It had been 30 hours since my waters had broken, and I was no longer absolutely able to tell what were Little Mermaid's movements and what were the soft quakes of my belly. So we made a nighttime trip to the hospital. Our midwife was pissed that we'd waited so long to tell her. I was pissed that her birth beliefs weren't the same as mine. But we crowded into that hospital room anyway. Me, Chris, our doula, and Elenita. I'd call Elenita to let her know what might be happening. She hadn't been able to sleep, so she'd come to find us anyway. So, at 4 a.m. in that white hospital room, we talked through our options. We knew that we would likely be induced when the sun began to rise, and we just prayed that all would be well. I just wanted my baby to be okay. And then we had an angel appear in the form of a doctor. He had soft eyes and lovely hands, and he gave me an ultrasound. With a sigh of relief, I saw our little mermaid's heart appear on the screen, pulsing strongly, her heartbeat as comforting and close to me as any sound can be. And this angel doctor of ours, he said so kindly, "You are well. Your baby is well. I want to give you another day. If nothing has happened by 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, come back in and we'll induce you. But I trust you. Your body is healthy and so is your baby." I want to cry right now just thinking of him. So the angel doctor gave us the gift of time, just what I'd been wanting, and we spent another quiet, still day at home together. That afternoon I had more acupuncture to encourage baby girl along. The Chinese girl turned to me and said softly, "I can't make her come all the way down, but I will make it easier for you tomorrow." That night we slept soundly again, and then that morning we rose, went to the hospital right on time, and got hooked up to a drip. That day was the biggest initiation I had ever experienced. Immediately, the contractions were strong and difficult to breathe through. I remember the first one sweeping me off my feet onto the ground, moaning and trying to push my hips into a comfortable position. My trio of angels, Chris, our doula Rachel, and Eleanor Ida, were gathered around me, massaging limbs, attempting to offer comfort. I figured I would try and active birth my way through the first part of labour, moving around, getting massaged, moaning, changing positions. 2 contractions later, I thought, fuck that, this is not helping. I'm going to get really tired really soon. I am not managing the pain like this. I'm going to have to calm birth the whole way. So I lay on my side in the bed for a while, willing my body's muscles to soften and relax into opening, breathing deeply, saying over and over again, "Relax, relax." It helped somewhat. After a half hour, maybe longer, who knows, I was in labour land. Our midwife decided I needed to be moving around so I didn't slow down labour. Her energy felt intrusive, and I mostly spent the rest of labour trying to stay away from her and unhooking myself from the beeping heart rate machine. I spent the rest of the 8 hours of labour either on the yoga ball or hiding in a loo trying to take a ginormous shit. I didn't speak. I didn't open my eyes. I had one finger which communicated with my support angels to tell them to place a straw in my mouth so I could drink water. I was busy. It took my whole being, my whole courage and strength and willpower and inner resources to breathe through the contractions. I breathed in for 4. I exhaled for 8. It took 3 breaths in for each contraction, and I knew the contraction would begin to subside around number 4 on the 3rd exhale. I had to keep breathing through the non-contractions, keeping my body as relaxed as possible, the meditation as deep as possible in order to tolerate the next rush. And I would only get 2 or 3 breaths in before the next ones began. If my concentration wavered, if I tried to come out of the meditation, the next round of contractions were unbearably painful. So I quickly learned that to cope, I needed to keep meditating. The difference between the pain of contractions when meditating and not meditating was vast, from tolerable to unbearable. And sweetheart, as any birthing woman or anyone who has suffered chronic pain can tell you, there is a world between tolerable and unbearable. Tolerable is being able to sit with it even if it's taking all of your inner resources and strength to do so. Unbearable is wanting to crawl the walls and freak the fuck out because you just don't know what else to do. So I meditated, and it was incredibly helpful, and I am grateful that I was able to, but still, it was not blissful meditation. It was not orgasmic. It was still childbirth. Had I not meditated, I absolutely believe I would have needed to choose medication instead, pain relief of some kind, any kind. There were many moments during labour that I hid in the bathroom, staring in the mirror, thinking, fuck, let's go have a cesarean. I really, really need this to be over right now. I just never told anyone. Because I chose to go through the birth centre, I was in a natural birthing system. So at no point was I offered any kind of pain medication. It would have been there had I asked, but they never actually said, "Do you need pain relief?" Thank fuck. Because if they'd asked, oh yes, I would have taken it, even though my intention was to have a medication-free birth. I remember thinking during that labour, no wonder people choose pain relief. No wonder people choose cesareans. Holy shit, this is the hardest fucking thing ever. Now, let me say this. I absolutely believe in positive birth experiences. I've had friends who have pain-free births, and I absolutely hoped and cultivated the ground for that to be the case for my own birth. And the truth and the experience of my birth was that it was incredibly painful, and that is my human truth. I've written quite a lot before about the birth as well, especially from a spiritual perspective. I absolutely feel and believe all these things, and at the same time, it resides side by side with my very human experience of it being deeply painful. My grandmother said to me a couple of weeks ago, "So, my love, was it an easy and a good birth with Astara?" And I laughed and I said, "Well, I tried to meditate through it. But an easy and good birth? Ha ha ha, what's that?" And she laughed too and said, "Oh, I know. I still remember my births. They were bloody painful." My grandmother is 93. She gave birth 70 years ago. At some point in the afternoon, I decided I'd had enough. I sidled my way up to Rachel, our doula. I swayed in her arms and I whispered to her my secret. "I can't do this anymore." She looked at me and said, "You are doing it." At some point, as the afternoon shadows fell into evening, I began to feel really different. The contractions didn't hurt anymore. I just wanted to push. I was grunting and propelling all this force down into my center. During the space between contractions, I could look around and talk. I looked at Elenita and Rachel. "This feels different," I said. They were exchanging looks. "Sounds like baby's coming, Leonie." "Well, can you tell me when? I need a time." And Rachel said, in that very relaxed way of hers, "I can't tell you how far along you are unless you want an internal examination, but it does sound like things are turning for you." And they were. I moved onto all fours, Chris beside my head, breathing next to my ear, Rachel by my side, Elenita massaging my hips and back. I lost a big blood clot and said to Rachel, "Is that supposed to happen?" "Yes, it means baby is coming, Leonie. Do you want to see if you can feel her head?" I checked, but I couldn't feel anything. And the words kind of spun me out. A baby? A baby is coming? So that's what all this pregnancy and birth was for? What is a baby? A real live person is coming? What? And I proceeded grunting and pushing and losing blood clots and successfully managing to take that ginormous shit I had been longing for in front of everyone. I didn't care. It felt like 9 months of pregnancy constipation was all blocked up inside me and finally making its run for freedom. And you know how some people get all freaked out about crapping in labour? Oh, not me. I was like, thank God. This ginormous shit has been inside me and annoying me for months now. And so what if it's in front of other people? That's nothing compared to what I've been through, people. Our midwife walked back into the room to check the beeping machine and ask questions as she was wont to do. But she stopped when she got in the door at the sight of us on the floor, me grunting away. "What's happening?" she asked. "Looks like we're having a baby," Rachel said cheerfully. And we proceeded to ignore her as she flitted about, getting out her instruments and blah, blah, blah. She decided she wanted us on the bed. I rolled my eyes, wanting to stay on the floor, but the joy of an induction and a hospital birth meant more monitoring than usual birth centre methods. So I got on the bed and kept doing my thing. Astara was born at 6:14 p.m. that evening, after 21 minutes of pushing. That part was dang easy, by the way. It wasn't at all painful. I loved every minute of it. I felt powerful and raw. It felt like a piece of fucking cake compared to the shithouse 8 hours of contractions that had preceded it. I was on all fours on the hospital bed. Right at the end, as she crowned, Astara's heartbeat began to drop rapidly, as they often do thanks to induction births. The midwife decided she needed a star out immediately and asked to give me an episiotomy. I said no. She let me know a star I needed to be out as soon as possible and told me I had one more round of contractions and pushing to get her out, or she needed to give me the episiotomy. The next round of contractions came and I pushed my heart out, pushing long after the contractions finished. I'm pretty sure this was what gave me some pretty nasty hemorrhoids. She still wasn't out, so I conceded for an episiotomy. I flipped to my side, Chris held my leg up, a quick snap, and in the next wave of contractions, Astara came out with one big, beautiful ocean gush of water. Our midwife caught her, handed her to Chris, and he passed her into my arms. I will always remember that moment. I felt totally lucid, totally there. Astara gave one cry as she arrived and then was quiet, looking around the room with those beautiful big blue eyes. And her presence was so strong, so big. And I thought, wow, you are here. Look at you. You are so strong. I was trying to find the words to say what it felt like, but it was just presence. This new soul entering the world. The womb feels like this incubation place, this time for the body to form and the soul to come into this plane. It's an in-between land, and then the birth is the emergence fully into this plane. She didn't cry, she just nestled in my arms. I was bloody and we were both covered in shit and blood and meconium. She must have needed a massive shit just like me. She crapped all over me when Chris passed her to me. I was absolutely elated, in love. I felt no pain at all. Astara was very healthy, despite the low heart rate that the beeping machine said she had. She got an immediate 9 out of 10 on the APGAR, and 5 minutes later had a 10 out of 10. I got a needle in the leg to speed contractions for the placenta to be delivered quickly. Another thing I wasn't super keen on happening in my birth plan, but was required for an induction birth. The placenta came, and the midwife made some comment about the umbilical cord being delicate and the placenta having some kind of fatty residue on it. I can't remember quite what she said, but I do remember that I tormented myself over it for quite a few months, that eating hot chips while I was pregnant had caused it. Because the hospital was packed that night, all doctors were unavailable, so I ended up getting the head doctor of the hospital in to stitch up my episiotomy. He was old and kind. The nurses whispered to me, "It's your lucky day. How did you get so lucky? The professor is the best you can get." I joked with him that it was fun to receive vagina embroidery from him and that we should do it again tomorrow just for fun. He said he hadn't heard that before. That's nice. It's nice to be memorable. In the meantime, we were attempting to get Astara on the boob. We placed her on my belly first to see if she wanted to nose her way up with her rooting instinct. She made great efforts, but didn't quite get there. So we played around with different positions, different levels of help. Finally, after an hour or so, we managed to get her to latch and suckle as we lay on our sides. I always remember her tiny, wide open eyes looking around the room as she fed, just like she does now. That same gaze as she looks at me. I remember my mum saying when she was a month old, "I've never seen a baby look at its mum with so much love before." And then the newborn period, that aching time. In the moment your child is born, a great owl swoops in and takes away your life, the one that you knew, how it was when you thought only of your own self and your own needs. There is just a momentous task ahead of you and right in front of you. And, of course, it is a time that's filled with rapturous blessings too. Time when you're so in love, when you are amazed at the miracle of light and life that's before you, where you absolutely know that the child you have is absolutely the child you were born to have. I remember one sleepless night running to the toilet as baby cried and Chris held her and just sobbing over and over and coming back into the room, taking her in my arms and smiling at her. He said, "It amazes me how you can be so sad, and yet when you look at her, you're always smiling." It was never about her, you know. From the first moment I knew I would have her, I knew it was my destiny. She was my daughter, the one I'd dreamed about for as long as I could remember. I'd always wanted to be a mother, the one I would do it all over again for. To go into the land of birth, of initiation, of postnatal depression and anxiety, to find her and bring her back and mother her the very best way I could. Shortly after she was born, we decided that we would move back to my hometown. We put our house on the market. We threw away half our belongings. We put our resignations into our work. It was a wild act of bravery and daring and courage and faith. And still it is hard on the body, the soul, the peace, the nervous system. While we waited to move, I was a solo parent while Chris was away 11 hours a day in a city with no family and no car. It was hard. I was beyond exhausted. I just kept plodding on, gaze firmly planted on the horizon, knowing we had to get there. You know, on and on I could number again and again, over and over, all the things that went wrong before, during, and after Ostara was born. I can tell you exactly why I got postnatal depression and anxiety. I was the poster child of it. When I looked at a list of all the major life stresses, we ticked off almost all of them. Before she was born, we had the death of a family member. We had to evict tenants. I had burnout and anxiety. I had major family issues. After she was born, we were in a town with no family. I was recovering from a birth that felt traumatic. I had an oversupply of milk and the subsequent 8 rounds of mastitis over the next year, 3 of which required late-night emergency trips to the hospital. Selling a house sales falling through, spending hours in the car with baby, my love, and 2 dogs in the freezing cold as the house was exhibited again and again. More family issues, problems with our neighbours, explosions outside our house. My love ended up in emergency on an ECG monitor on heart attack watch. More tenant issues. The week we moved, Chris's best friend died in his sleep on his own birthday. Moving. Being away from my love for a week because we flew up ahead. More mastitis, ending up in emergency again at night with a little baby. Our furniture getting lost for a week. Making the transition from 2 jobs and a business to just having my business. Family issues becoming huge, colossal family issues. Having a very hard re-entry into small town country life after being away from my family for so long. Trying to be super mum and holding it all together. My parents separating, my brother and his wife separating, the same week, Christmas. My love and I doing deep work and counselling together and individually to keep from imploding. And I'm sure there are things now that I have so happily forgotten. But let me assure you, it felt like my whole life, my whole world was imploding. And again, the exhaustion, the sheer insurmountable task of tending to a baby, of grieving so deeply that the life you had once, where you thought only of yourself, all that time you had to read and rest and eat and paint and surf the internet and make creative miracles, gone. It was utterly gone. I had a baby that did not sleep on her own outside of my arms, or the baby that did not sleep through the night, or for any great swathes of it, of beating myself up on my perfect mum expectations, of everything, just everything. It was my Saturn return, my 27th year, the year that everything broke apart. And so it was that I found myself, my nightly ritual of cooking dinner while Chris held Astara in the lounge room and laying on the kitchen floor, willing myself to breathe, willing away the anxiety attacks. They became ever present. It wasn't just feeling anxiety, it was wading through it chest high every single fucking day. At night, I'd lay in bed and my body would be rigid, straight, as stiff as a board, my fingers clenched, my jaws clenched. I cried a lot. I was angry a lot. And I was angry with Chris a lot. Everything hurt. I grieved, and I was sad, and I was anxious, and I was in pain. I remember thinking over and over, please make this stop. Please make all of it end. I just want to be happy again. I want my good life back. I just want myself again. Please just make it stop. I wanted the baby to stop crying. I wanted the craziness to stop. I wanted everything to stop. I wanted my old life back. I wanted to be me again, and I felt like I was a million miles away from that. And I had no idea where I had gone. And so it was. That was the moment I knew that what I was feeling was more than just normal. That moment on the veranda, tears streaming down my face, fighting against an anxiety attack. I stammered out the words, "Honey, I don't feel right. I think there's something wrong with me. I remember how I used to feel. I used to be happy a lot. I used to think that life was good. I don't feel that way anymore. And I think there's something wrong in my body." It was a turning point. The point at which you say, "I'm not okay." "Okay," he said. "What do you want to do? Do we go to the doctor?" I decided straight away I did not want to go on any depressants. I was still breastfeeding, and I'm a big believer in using both traditional and allopathic and alternative medicine. I wanted to undergo every single other healing avenue first. I booked in to see the doctor. I wanted a blood test to find out if there are any deficiencies in my blood that I could work on with alternative health practitioners. I told him what I wanted it done for. He said, "Well, the first thing I'd recommend is giving up breastfeeding. She's over 6 months old now, so there's no real point." I fixed a gaze on him and laughed dryly. "Buddy, that's not happening anytime soon. I plan on following the World Health Organization's standard of 2 years or further as much as possible." He laughed. "That's just really for kids in Rwanda, you know." I blinked and blinked and blinked. Then I said, "Write me the script for the blood tests and let's agree to disagree." Chris looked at me with a knowing look. He said later, "As soon as the doctor said that, I thought, oh no, buddy, wrong answer. You've done it now. She's never coming back to see you again." And he was right. I found a new doctor after that, who just happened to think that that first doctor's suggestion for a woman suffering postnatal depression to give up breastfeeding was a very, very incorrect prescription. I want to say a note on the side here. Breastfeeding is great if it works for you. If it doesn't, bottle is great. Neither route is the easy one. You do what you can, what works best for you, babe, and your family. I feel like any kind of strongly held this way or the highway belief can be harmful when it doesn't work for you or your family. So, I researched the internet to find what therapy would help best with anxiety. I remember how my Canberra acupuncturist during pregnancy was so helpful with my anxiety. So I found a new one in Proserpine and got recommendations. They turned out to be right, of course. She was an angel, a healer, who poured Reiki over me as the needles were in. just 30 minutes at a time. The anxiety started to improve inch by inch, less constant freak out, more background buzz. On top of all the pile of awful life stuff that was happening, I had huge expectations that I had on myself. And as much as anyone would tell me I needed to do it differently, to be more gentle on myself, I would feel judged. It was only me that could finally find the path that felt good and light to myself. I thought that when I became a mum in the space of a moment, the split second she was born, I would become a perfect mother. I had all these ideas of who I should be instead of who I actually was. I wound myself up in knots, running to try and be perfect, and beating myself up in all the places I was not. My love, who is such a simple sage, took me to the cafe to stage a perfect mother intervention. He took out a notebook and a pen. Write down for me what you need to do every day, what you want to do every day. And so I began. I wrote, meditate. Take care of Starry, write 3 pages, cook 3 wholesome meals a day made out of organic food that I have gardened. Do gardening. Have a very large organic veggie patch and fruit tree patch. Read to Starry. Give her as much eye contact as possible. Do 30 minutes of yoga. Spend time with the dogs. Watch no TV. Make art. Spend time talking to Chris. Work and reply to emails and do all of my business and go to sleep early. We exchanged lists. His list read, be a good dad and partner. Be happy. Wow, he said to me when he read my list. No wonder you feel so overwhelmed. It's too much, Leonie. You need to just go easy on yourself. How is that even possible? I asked. Leonie, he said, I've loved you for 10 years. And what I know about you, all you really need to do is love me, love your daughter, and make art. That's what makes you happy. And all the time I've known you, you haven't gardened every day. You haven't meditated. You haven't done all that stuff every day. And you like watching TV, for fuck's sake. You're so hard on yourself. You feel so guilty. What would life look like if you were easy on yourself? I was speechless. What indeed would my life look like if I gave up the guilt and just gave myself the easy way? It became my mantra. What would the easy way be? I'd walk down the supermarket halls and I'd say to Chris, did you know I felt guilty the whole way through this supermarket? That at every turn I felt like I was making the wrong decision, or at least the one that was not the very best? That I felt guilty when I bought non-organic food. And even when I bought organic, I still beat myself up that I hadn't grown it myself. And he looked at me with these eyes and he'd say, you can't live like that, Leonie. Just be easy. So I gave up my grand schemes of growing everything myself and making everything myself and becoming some kind of hippie Betty Crocker who'd had a 3-way with Martha Stewart and Jackie French. And instead I became the mother I am. I gave up my grand idea of juicing everything myself and bought pre-juiced juice because that's the only way I drank juice. I gave up my schemes of only homemade meals and started buying ready-made meals instead. Risottos and salads and meals I could make in 5 minutes. Food that was close enough and good enough. I kept asking, how can I be easier on myself? And instead of jumping out of bed into full-on action mum mode at the crack of dawn when Astara awoke, I implemented gentle warnings. Now I don't get out of bed until 8 a.m. Astara wakes much earlier, of course, but she sleeps in bed between us. And so we spend the early hours of each day playing in bed and reading. She toddles off around the house doing endless boomerangs. And when we get our much required gentle time, it's pretty much the most revolutionary thing ever. Sometimes easy is the best and the loveliest. I gave up being the perfect mother and embraced instead the magnificent mother that I already am. Funny, creative, a non-elaborate cook, balanced, sleeping in, TV watching. I didn't have to change really to be who I was. I started taking an hour each week to go for a massage or a healing, Taking an hour was momentous, a whole hour away from baby, slowly, slowly sending love and energy and nourishment back into my soul. I started rebuilding my body that felt so depleted after birth, the lack of sleep, breastfeeding, and tending to a baby. I consulted a naturopath. I started taking fish oil and vitamin B12 and tonics from the naturopath. I remember talking to her over the phone. She had the softest English accent. She'd been a midwife and she understood. She asked me how I was and I cried. And I said, "My baby is 9 months old. Does everyone feel like this at 9 months?" "Oh, yes," she said. "That's when the depletion kicks in." It was Project Body Rebuild. I started eating meat again after 3 years of being vegetarian because my body just was not coping. I used bushflower essences. I got intuitive healing sessions. I did a rebirth session to revisualize Astara's birth. I had a dream that Palladian alien angels came down and asked me if I wanted a total cellular replacement, and I said yes. And they stripped away all my old cells and they gave me new ones. It was the most incredible healing ever. I read all of the archives from Ask Moxie's website on postpartum depression. We got relationship counseling. I remember reading once that having a baby is like throwing a grenade into a marriage, and I thought, ha, not me, that's other people. But guess what? It happened. And guess what? It can be helped. Counseling really is an incredible thing. I got personal counseling just to talk through everything that had happened, to say what was sitting so heavily on my chest. I had told no one of what happened in the year of the shitstorm. And then I reached out. I told 2 friends. I felt like I'd been carrying around a great secret of the shitstorm. And then I let my story float into the breeze. I couldn't even say the words to my friends. I just wrote, "I think I have PND." It was scary to write, but I was listened to. And they said, "Oh, baby, that sounds like the hardest year ever. I understand. Things will get better. I love you. I'm here. I'm listening." It was the best thing they could have said. They just listened and they loved me. At one point, I remember a mama friend writing, "Leonie, this is going to really piss you off. But give Astara to Chris for a few hours. Go lock yourself away and make art. She can survive without you, even if it means giving her boobs every hour or so, then go back to your art." And I remember reading her words thinking, "Are you fucking kidding me? What? That's impossible." But then it did happen. I made it happen. Not easily, not flowingly, but it happened. I started taking regular daily time to myself. All this time I'd been running my beautiful business from my iPod or in the 20-minute naps Astara had. It was crazy making and exhausting. So I negotiated with my husband. Where we both felt able, I began to work in a cafe for an hour or two a day. For the first few months, we really only managed to do that 2 or 3 times a week. But it was the very best thing for me to rebuild my body, to find my inner voice and intuition again, to create and write and start smiling at the world again. And for my love and my daughter to work out their own dance together without me, to get comfortable with each other and to find their own blend of what worked for them. And guess what? The world didn't fall down. I remember sitting in the cafe, laptop open, doodling in my notebook, creating a folder of Leonie, a blissful grin on my face, an artist date. Art was the key to healing this mama's soul. It was good. What else helped me heal? Time. It just takes time. It takes time for your body, your womb, your vagina, your heart, and your mind to heal after birth. It takes time to adjust. And all you can do in the meantime is clutch to the edge of your boat, hoping for the waves to subside. They eventually do, of course. It's just holding on to hope and peace and breathing in the meantime. There was one night in the shower that a great healing occurred. I was anxious as always. I'd given Astara a bath. Chris had collected her, and she began crying as she always did the moment that she was out of my arms. And I stood in the bath trying to squeeze in the very basics of self-care, having a 20-second shower, and a voice said, "You need this time." And I decided that instead of running out to Astara once more, I would give her into the soul care of her father. "Let them work it out together," the voice said. "Their energies need to come together and work out their own dance." So I stood in the shower and I cried. And inside me I felt there was something deeper stirring, something that wanted to come out. "Okay," I said, and I stepped into the feeling. And there it was, like a great wash of deep sadness and pain. Every cell in my body hurting and in pain, holding onto the memory of what it felt like during labor. I heard it, I felt it, I knew it, and I leaned into it. "I hear you." I curled up on the floor and I said to my body, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you went through that. I'm so sorry." And the sobs came, deep and intense and cathartic, rising up and healing my poor sweet body that had experienced so much pain. I held myself until the tears left and the sadness of that pain lifted off me like a flock of crimson birds. It lasted about 30 minutes, and when the tears left, I felt elated, cleansed, and whole. I climbed the stairs up into our cottage, and Astara was asleep in my love's arms, and he had the sweetest look on his face. And I kept on healing. I kept listening to my intuition. I kept trying to give myself what I was needing. I kept giving myself the support I needed. All the alternative therapies I used helped in so many ways, in rebuilding my body and helping my anxiety and improving my life in so many ways. And after 3 months of working with alternative therapies, I decided I need to give myself additional support, of also using antidepressants. I felt like I'd gotten my well filled up a few inches below the bottom, and I wasn't bottoming out, but I had this endless feeling that it was only a week away or another shitty thing happening to get there again. So I found a really kind doctor and I told him the journey I'd been on, and he understood it all. And we chose an antidepressant that was safe for breastfeeding, and that's what we did. We used both Eastern and Western medicine. Healing is just like what Shrek says, you know. It's not linear. It goes through layers, like an onion. All these things may sound a lot. It might seem like an impossible list for someone who's deep in it and wants to start feeling better now. What I can say is, every one of those things helped. I didn't do them all at once. I did them as my own heart told me. Each step of the way, life did get easier. Anxiety got easier. The huge waves of my life subsided. I learned and I healed. I learned how to be gentle with myself. I found what kind of mama I was, and I accepted her with my whole heart. I chose the path of easy. I learned how to set and maintain healthy boundaries for myself and my little family. I found deep, huge, and abiding compassion for every mother who's been through this, and for every soul who has been through their own dark night. This story has been ruminating in me for some time. How on earth can I tell it? I had to wait until I was beyond it before I could write it. And when I did write it, it took me 3 months to tell me the story. Even now, I don't quite know if I've said enough, described enough, shared enough. But here it is, turning up. I know I need to share this story. I know some women need to hear it. I know they need to know they're not alone. I know this story needs to be told. 9 months ago, I admitted for the first time to people outside of Chris and our doctors. But I couldn't even write it as postnatal depression. I just remember I used the exact words, P and D. I think I might have it. I was terrified of what that might mean for other people to know. 5 months ago, I was crouched on the floor of my childhood home with my sister and a dear friend, And we talked about motherhood and postnatal depression. And my sister said, "Do you ever think you'll tell everyone about it? Like write about it?" I shook my head furiously. No, no way. I can't let anyone know, ever. One day, she said. One day you'll know it's just a part of your story, and you'll feel brave enough to tell the world. Today's the day. Once upon a time, a goddess became a mama, and she lost everything she knew in order to become who she was. I wanted to share something else. A friend said to me recently, "I've got no idea how you managed to keep working, keep writing, keep doing what you do when you suffered from postnatal depression." And here's the thing, my job, this funny, beautiful thing of taking dictation from spirit and helping other women, it's been one of the joys when my world turned upside down. With steadfast faith, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be, doing what I needed to be doing. I can't help but be who I am and love this work with all my heart. So I replied, it was exactly what I needed. It was the thing I was born to do. Even when I was in the throes of PND, I still loved my life. I still loved my daughter and myself and my love. I still found so many things to be grateful for and excited by. It just wasn't as good as it could have been. It wasn't the same, and I lost me. And then I journeyed and I found her again, and it was good. I was wiser and stronger than ever. I'm beyond postnatal depression now. I'm healed and my life is good in so very many ways. I'd always known that in my 27th year I would face every single one of my shadows, and it would also be the year I became a mother. And that's what happened. And I'm standing before you with the song of my soul tattooed all over me. I foraged in the wilderness. I learned what I needed to know. I'm so damn grateful for all of it, for the depression and for the healing of that depression. I'm exactly who I needed to be because of it. I'm a real woman, a wise woman, a mother, a lover, one who's seen into the depths of a lion's mouth, and she's returned, star for glowing, saying, yes, it happened, and still there is so much beauty. And that is my story. I hope it has resonated with you. I hope it has been of solace and healing for you. I offer up my story to the world, and I send you so much love.